Howdy y'all, this is Taylor Ursula of That's So Pisces, and we've got a third quarter moon in Gemini to explore. So let's begin. This third quarter moon in Gemini takes place at 3 degrees at about 2:30 a.m. here on the West Coast on Monday, August the 26th. So this third quarter moon comes through and kind of reactivates all of the activity that's been unfolding on the mutable axis. This all kind of started really with the Mars-Jupiter conjunction in Gemini at 16 degrees that we had a couple weeks back. And in the same week, we saw Mars square Saturn just about 2 days later. This was all part of a larger buildup to the very big, very impactful full moon that we had in Aquarius last week, which leads us to this third quarter moon. So at that full moon, you may recall that we had our Mercury cazimi at about 26 degrees of Leo. We had Venus squaring Jupiter and opposing Saturn. We had Jupiter square Saturn. We had the Sun and Mercury and the Moon T-squaring Uranus. And Saturn, receiving all of this attention, was ruling over this moon. So this moon moving through Gemini will come through and in some ways reactivate or help us integrate everything that we've been working to process for the last 2 weeks or so. All of that activity took place while we were still in Leo season. We are now approaching these same themes, but from Virgo. Virgo, of course, is the fourth sign in the mutable axis that we just explored. So there's something to maybe a shift in how we're kind of grounding into the changes that were brought up at that full moon, the information that was revealed at that full moon, the consequences of some of those squares and oppositions. Now, with the Sun and the Moon both being ruled by Mercury, we must also weave in the notion that Mercury is slowing at this time as it prepares to station direct 2 days after this third quarter moon occurs. So with Mercury still retrograde and also slower than, well, it's slow during retrograde, but it's approaching its slowest point, we might find that we still have lots to process and integrate. Sitting with this moment, sitting with these feelings, maybe some truths emerged and maybe some anxieties surfaced, and maybe it's still hard to know what's real and what's coming from a place of reactivity. This is especially true as Mercury stations direct on the same day that Venus opposes Neptune in Pisces, who's currently retrograde. And Venus is doing this before it moves into its home sign of Libra on Thursday. Venus, therefore, is still also being ruled by Mercury that is coming to this slow moment. So there's even more uncertainty and perhaps grief or anxiety around the fact that we can't perfect any of the ways we've been trying to relate to other people. We can't merge into some sort of higher psychic state and kind of just feel what everyone's feeling. We can work and we can try and we can put in the effort to state things in a way that's rational and proven to us, and yet there's still something bigger that is looming and that is sort of casting this shadow of doubt or, again, like imperfection or our ideals never quite living up to the reality that we're living through and experiencing. Let's roll through the aspects at this moon and see what's in here. The moon enters into Gemini today, Sunday the 25th at 8 p.m. here on the West Coast, and promptly moves into a trine with Pluto currently retrograde at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So there's some of our processing, there's some of our understanding, at least within ourselves, what's coming up for us, what's being triggered, hopefully getting some insight into the deeper connections beneath those triggers, gaining some insight into who we are at this moment, what has power over us that lives within us, and what can we identify from that recognition that we are able to maybe parse out and determine to let go of. That's the aspect the moon is bringing in as it squares the sun. So there may be a sense of pressure to really get to the bottom of something based on this conversation with Pluto. What do we think we understand in this moment? What proof do we have that supports that knowledge that we're carrying? And can we identify some of the fallibilities in that proof? That's not to suggest that everything we think we know is false. It's more to recommend taking an assessment of what we think we know and finding some of the weakest points within that and maybe testing them to see if they still hold up to what we've learned recently and what we still have to learn. So again, this first quarter moon is taking place very early Monday morning here on the West Coast, very late Sunday evening for y'all elsewhere. Later in the day on Monday, we have the moon make a sextile to the North Node in Aries at 7 degrees. Again, this is not, the nodes don't give energy, so there's not necessarily a reassurance that we're heading in the right direction, but there may be subtle signs that we are making choices that are moving us toward a path that's calling to us now. On Tuesday the 27th, we have the moon in Gemini come through and make that square to Saturn, retrograde in Pisces at 16 degrees. So the moon is activating the Saturnian part of this, again, whole configuration, conversation, feedback loop that was triggered, all leading up to the Aquarius full moon. What comes up for you when you consider letting go of some of the faulty or weak links in what you know at this time? And what sense of outside pressure is on you? What responsibility do you feel that you are speaking to in trying to know or contain or prove all these things that you've known to this point? Where do you feel up against a wall? What about your ideas at this time are really butting up against some of the more collective emotions that are being experienced? The moon goes on to make a conjunction to Jupiter in Gemini at 18 degrees, okay? And this might activate it's kind of interesting because Jupiter kind of asks us to pick things up, and the moon here in its third quarter stage, now moving past the third quarter stage and now fully beginning to enter into the dark phase. This moon is asking us to let things go. There may be then, in this sense, some ego triggered around the blockages we are identifying in that square to Saturn. Maybe it has meant a lot to know all the things that we have known up to this point, and perhaps there's something about releasing that knowledge or acknowledging that some parts of it or pieces of it have become outdated, impractical, irrelevant, or just downright false. There might be some challenge in these planets meeting where Jupiter still wants us to kind of tap into some of those bigger feelings of importance. The moon sextiles its ruler Mercury in Leo at 21 degrees, and this is taking place on Tuesday, now the day before Mercury stations direct. And so there may be a call to stillness at this time if we are willing and able to identify it and tune into it. Mercury perhaps passing on a message of fixity, right? We have Mercury in a fixed sign. We have the moon in a mutable sign. Mercury might be trying to stabilize things now while allowing us some deeper insight into what we're feeling and how it's impacting how we're thinking at this moment. The moon ends the day in a sextile to Chiron retrograde in Aries at 25 degrees. Maybe this is also an invitation to, in the stillness that Mercury has provided us, maybe to take a moment and just feel the aches that come with this experience. We keep trying to do so much to move through the discomfort, and that might be some of where we've led ourselves into false or outdated knowledge, simply by remaining kind of distracted by the doing, and we might just need to feel and acknowledge and accept in this moment. I just lied about the moon. There are more transits to come for the moon, but before those arrive, we have a trine from Venus in Virgo to Uranus in Taurus. Okay, so this is where we might find a little bit of grace, relief, humor, okay? If we're feeling kind of deflated about things, if we're having a hard time acknowledging or owning what might not be true in various ways, then there's a little bit of relief that comes through in this trine from Venus to Uranus. Venus is still in detriment and ruling this Uranus, and therefore it may not look exactly like what we want in this moment, but if we're open to it, we could find ourselves pleasantly surprised. Some new connection, some new understanding, some new resource, some new access to something may allow us a change of heart in this moment. The moon makes a conjunction to Mars at 25 degrees of Gemini. And maybe, since this follows the Venus-Uranus trine, maybe this gives us something we're able to act on, right? Again, we're still kind of seeing the moon reactivate everything that came up when all these planets had these intense configurations leading up to this full moon that we had last week. And so maybe depending on how we navigate that sextile to Chiron in Aries being ruled by Mars, that might help us understand what this conjunction to Mars is asking us. Are we sharing some feelings in some way, right? Are we acting on our feelings in some sort of manner of conducting research or about taking in new information? Where is that coming from? Is there a sense of ego in that need? Are we doing the research in order to try to continue to prove what it is that we're struggling to name as false? For example, are we kind of acting on a sense of blame or entitlement? Those are some of the more like negative traits we might see with Mars. There could be a drive to learn what we need to come replace this information or this knowledge that we're acknowledging is maybe out of date or subject to change. We might be activating a sense of catharsis in finding the energy to move through whatever these tough emotions are that are coming up. The moon squares Venus in Virgo, all right, at 27 degrees. So the moon really picks up on whatever Venus collected from that trine to Uranus earlier in the day. The moon might be able to open up and receive from this Venus in a way that maybe the moon's been struggling with by moving through these other planetary aspects. If nothing else, there might be a feeling of relief here. We might be able to tap into something a little bit like nostalgic or comforting in this moment. We might be able to reach out to a friend. We might be able to connect with nature in some way that just allows us a bit of respite. The moon actually ends the day here with a square to Neptune retrograde at 29 degrees. So still a little bit of confusion here, still a little bit of what I have here on the ground up against what is so big and unknown in the vast universe. Maybe feelings of helplessness here, or again, I think I just used the word uncertainty. We would be questioning what we know and how we feel, and we might end this day a little bit in a spirally place. We may want to lean into some artistic expression, whether that's like taking in art or making art. We might want to kind of lean into fantasy where we can, as a blanket, not an escape necessarily. And again, this all leads us to Wednesday the 28th, where we see Venus come through and make that opposition to Neptune that I mentioned, and Mercury stationing direct at 21 degrees of Leo. The moon does move into Cancer earlier on this day before these other aspects happen. So the moon is no longer being controlled by Mercury as it's stationing. And it gets to return to itself, be self-ruled for this moment. So at least our emotions are able to kind of come home in a sense. Okay, let's go ahead and do a quick recap of the pulls we've seen, starting with the Leo new moon, ranking up to that Scorpio first quarter moon, ramping up to that Aquarius full moon, and now pulling some cards for this Gemini third quarter moon. Stay tuned. Okay, we've got a recap of our Leo new moon, our Scorpio first quarter moon, and last week's Aquarius full moon. If you missed any of these, pause here, click on these links, get caught up, and meet us back here for the finale. All right, you ready? Let's do this thing. At this third quarter moon, we are asking about what is coming to a close now. Last week, we got a glimpse of what we were preparing to release, and it was the Seven of Wands reversed, which was perhaps a reluctance, a resistance, a blockage in defending ourselves and standing up for what we have and what we have fought for and what we have earned. I'm curious to see what that leads us to. So, what is coming to a close now, as well as my previous attachment to what is ending now? Because we are humans and we become attached to all these things. And this is a third quarter moon being ruled by a Mercury in a fixed sign. How can I make meaning from this process? Because again, we're humans and we seek resolution. Lastly, what I can invite in at this time. All right. Knowing that we are bringing ourselves into the Virgo new moon next week. And I believe I called this setting a new canvas. We can kind of get a sense of what we can invite in to start filling that canvas as this light wanes. Okay. We'll take a look at the bottom of the deck, see what stories lie beneath, and we'll see where that leaves us as this moon phase ends. Okay. I know I pulled this for someone in the Virgo forecast video. I'm actually inclined to think that it was Gemini. If anyone watched the Gemini video and can confirm, that would be really fun. But I'm fairly certain this was on the bottom of the deck for those who tuned in for Gemini, whether that was rising, sun, or moon. And what we talked about then which is very interesting and certainly relevant to this third quarter moon, was where we were unlearning things. Okay, the king is a sign of mastery. The King of Swords is where we have mastered some sort of information system, perhaps. And I use the example that I pulled this card for someone who was finishing a master's in library sciences. So, quite literally, mastering information, where to find it, how to help people find it, categories of information. Okay. So what we talked about in the Gemini forecast was what are we unlearning at this time? And again, that feels very appropriate for this third quarter moon, as I described it, being the moon in Gemini, squaring the sun in Virgo, both being ruled by Mercury, and being about ideas and proof. How do I prove this idea? So what are we seeing come up for us that is being disproven in some way? What are we actively disproving for ourselves? We also talked about some of the shadow side of this card, which might be manipulating information, whether we're conscious of it or not, right? We might be in a position where we are using the information we have mastered in some way that is unhelpful at best and punitive or, again, manipulative at worst. What do we do with what we know? How do we wield this sort of truth? Do we do it to guide others toward honor? My hand taking this sword. Do we do it to guide others toward honor, or do we do it to cut them? Do we do it to, like, how are we proving what we know? And also why? What is the motivation behind that? So how are we wielding this truth, this mastery? Maybe this is supposed mastery, all right? That in itself could be the manipulation, is acting as though we have mastered something when maybe we haven't. Okay, so some different ideas for what could be happening here. Let's take a look at what is coming to a close now. Well, that's a welcome sign, or I think so. I think that's welcome. Two of Swords usually gets like a... And the reason I question myself is that, is it beneficial to see the Two of Swords upright in the position of what's coming to a close? Or is it stressful to see this period coming to a close? Okay, well, let's talk about the two. The two is, I mean, I love that we're just here in Swords. It's very Gemini, very air sign. So we are in the two dealing with a position of kind of not knowing what choice to make on the surface of things, maybe beneath recognizing that the choice is going to be made either way. There's no other way forward here. Let's take a look at this. We're going into the tunnel, right? So the question is not, do I go into the tunnel? The question is, what do I take with me, right? And so we might be upright in a place of needing to kind of shift our way of thinking about things in order to find the answer that we're seeking, because the way we're seeking it, or even the answer we're seeking, is not really the answer that's going to be helpful to us. So upright, perhaps we are finally shifting out of this position, or having this recognition that we've been asking the wrong question. Maybe the moving through this portal, this tunnel, is coming to a close. Maybe needing to be armed is coming to a close. Okay, I'm curious, and let me know in the comments what this brings up for you, but I'm curious about which iteration of this might be true for you. Maybe the resistance of this moment, right? The resistance could be recognized here in this reversal. If we've been kind of, thinking about the traditional Rider-Waite image and that blindfold, right? Have we been clinging to the blindfold and refusing to make a choice or to choose what to arm ourselves with? And is that resistance or that refusal or that rejection softening now? Okay. My previous attachment to what is ending now. Oh, there's our card for the year, y'all. All right, this is deeply buried in our survival instincts. Okay, it's what we've been navigating all year. we're coming up on the final like quarter of the year, right? Summer will end with Virgo season, and we will shift into fall, and we will start wrapping up this strength arc. So, time to get clear right now on the fact that our attachment to this resistance is deeply instinctual, is primal within us. We've been carrying around this resistance for a long time. Oh my, okay, yeah, how we can make meaning from this process. Oh, that is interesting. We've got two majors here, so what we are taking in or really letting go of at this time is kind of being activated here at this moon, but it's going to take us a while to process, which really makes so much sense for the fact that, once more, this is a moon and a sun, and therefore for every other planet, if you watch the Virgo transit video, every planet right now is being ruled by Mercury, okay? Mercury ruling the sun ruling Mercury. All right, Mercury ruling Venus, okay? Mercury ruling Mars, who's ruling Chiron and the North Node. All right, Mercury ruling Jupiter, who's ruling Saturn, okay? So all of our like traditional visible planets are being ruled by Mercury. We could even throw everyone else in there. Uranus is being ruled by Venus, who's being ruled by Mercury. Pluto is in Aquarius, being ruled by Saturn, being ruled by Jupiter, being ruled by Mercury. Neptune is in Pisces, being ruled by Jupiter, being ruled by Mercury, okay? Mercury is ruling everything at a great disadvantage at this moment. So it makes all the sense in the world that we would have some really big things and themes opening up here at this third quarter moon that we're working on releasing that are going to take us some time to actually move through. Also, stepping away from a king is going to take, like, it took time to get here, right? So it's going to take time to step away from it. Okay, justice, we need to focus on making this right, however that works for us. Whew. I think of this, and this is Libra, and this is where the South Node is, and this is where Venus will be soon. I think of this as kind of being really black and white about it, right? I often say, don't be black and white about it. But in this moment, if we're very emotional about this, if this is something that's buried deeply within us, that we've been carrying for our whole lives, then we do need to find some sort of objectivity here. We do need to maybe weigh things out, if not alone, because we're the ones embroiled in this scenario, then perhaps with others around us, perhaps with some unbiased party. We need to kind of get a ruling, perhaps, on this, especially in areas where we are feeling very triggered and reactive, is the word that I used in the transit portion, okay? We need to focus on making things right. And again, we're identifying this in this moon. That doesn't mean that we are tackling it and solving it in this one lunar cycle, or phase rather. We are gonna maybe welcome that, and we're gonna see what else we're gonna invite into how we embrace that Virgo new moon. What we can invite in at this time. Oh my God, okay, a third major. Wow, this is freaking dope, actually. I'm here for this, all right? This is sort of the like chaotic good that we need in this moment. And this is a little bit like Uranian energy, right? Leaping into what opens up in front of us and not fearing the consequences. It feels like a beautiful omen to see as we prepare for the new moon in Virgo, which will be ruled by a Mercury slowly beginning to make its way through this retrograde shadow. So again, moving in some stillness, but direct, and allowing us to begin making sense of things, allowing us to begin making things right. Jumping, inviting in opportunities to do this, right? We don't need to be doing this right now. We need to be doing this right now, all right? And getting a closer look at what is happening here. But we're inviting in opportunities for newness. And I think that's lovely, knowing that we have trines to Uranus again from Venus this week, as well to be followed by the Sun and Mercury. Okay, so we have a really nice embrace of Uranus and change and new opportunities for growth and experience at this time. And this might be a nice antidote to some of the discomfort that comes up in the rest of what's happening here. Knowing that there are new chances to start over is often helpful when we are confronting where we might have gotten trapped in an old story that's no longer supporting us, and we're letting it really inform and misshapen our understanding of what's happening in the present. Y'all, this feels like a potent way to end this lunation cycle. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know how this lands for you in the comments. If you enjoyed, please give this a like. Maybe share with someone who's ready for that clean canvas we've been talking about. That's it right there. I love that that came full circle. And subscribe so we can talk about that Virgo new moon and begin this new lunation cycle together. So I'll see you then.